those of the individual co-host and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on our live shows.
Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of This Week in Guns is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to This Week in Guns. This show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network and Patriot Patch Company.
And the show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Sean Herron. And before we continue on any further, let's talk about our sponsors. We have the Patriot Patch Company. You can find them at patriotpatch.co and also Second Call Defense. Find them at firearmsradio.tv/SCD. And as always, I love introducing our guests. Tonight, it's going to be great because I didn't write down any bios ahead of time, so I'm just going to make this up as I go. But first up, we have returning to us the attorney and author of the 10-novel series, 299 Days. He does so many other things. Glenn Tay, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me. Love being on the show.
Glad to have you, man. Next up, we have the most bearded man in North Carolina. He is the man behind...
Whoa. That's a hate phrase.
It really is.
I'm from South Carolina.
Whatever. It's the same, right? I don't
want to get confused with Yankee Carolina.
Whoa.
The man behind all of the coolest guns that ever fought wars with Sea and Arsenal. Othais, welcome back, buddy.
Howdy.
Glad to have you here. And last minute, weighing in at 174 pounds, he's the man behind The Second Is For Everyone and DiversityShoot.com. Also co-host on a podcast on the Firearms Radio Network, The Gun and Gear Review. And his name is Tony Simon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on, Sean. Love it as usual.
All right. So I kind of did all that without really knowing, but is there anything else that anyone's added since the last time I knew? Glenn, I'll start with you. Any other stuff? I know you're doing all kinds of stuff. You got a radio show, all kinds of other stuff, right?
Yeah, I have a podcast, Prepping 2.0. It's about prepping that next level. And then I have a radio show in Colorado that most people listening probably aren't going to be able to listen to. So let's just go with Prepping 2.0 podcast as my added thing. So, and that's it.
All right. I love it. Othais, did I miss anything?
No, I went outside.
That's so great. You went outside on the East Coast.
Big boy.
DC? Yeah, it was great. And Tony Simon, what did I miss?
Gun and Gear Review podcast on the Firearms Radio Network, and of course the 2A4E podcast. And I fanboyed out with Othais real quick in DC. I was like, "Oh my God, you're Othais! I love you, man." And he's like, "Get away from me, large black man." And then he walked away.
I'm a hugger. Strangers, grandmas.
Exactly. I've seen it. Waitresses.
You're still jealous, man.
Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I've seen it all. He's amazing. Let's get right into the news, guys. First up, let's talk about what you guys just mentioned. Mainstream coverage of this weekend's rally. It comes to us from Newsweek.com, and the Second Amendment supporters gather at U.S. Capitol to promote gun rights. In this Newsweek article, it says about 1,000 people. Othais, what do you think? About 1,000 people?
I'm really bad at judging crowds, and I saw some estimates of about people were saying 1,700. I'm going, that feels a bit much. But I'd say between 1K and 1,500. But again, I was paying more attention to what was going on the stage, so it's hard to say. It's also like gas. Gun owners fill whatever vessel you put them in because we're not exactly a huggy group, other than me. So people sort of fanned out, and even the people who are ardent supporters don't really want to be in close proximity because it's already sort of a self-selection for a group that isn't really group-minded. So it's hard to estimate, but the good news is everybody seemed to be in a good mood. There were no real agitators. There are a handful of angsty boys, but that's about it. So, about as good as you could expect.
Did you think it was a valuable thing? I mean, basically, and for those who aren't aware, it was the Second Amendment rally. Second Amendment 2ndamendmentrally.com is where you can find out more.
So for those who aren't aware, actually, let me pause it this way, because there is some controversy here, which is that it was held in Washington, D.C. It was only a 6-week announcement, and it was primarily done by what you would call new media, so YouTube channels and the like. And so on those basis, it was an interesting take, because you're inevitably going to hemorrhage a lot of support when you said you can't be armed at a pro 2A rally. And a lot of people were very irritated at the idea that you have a rally that says, we will not comply while you are simultaneously complying. So if you think that it's hypocritical, if you think that you don't appreciate that, I'm not going to argue with you. Those are valid criticisms of this sort of thing. What I did see a lot of, and the reason I ultimately went, is a lot of people were just sort of externalizing their excuses, but not actually standing on any valid criticisms. And there's a lot of that going on. There's people going, well, I can't, that's like a 4-hour drive, or I got to get on an airplane, or I got to, and they just, those sort of barriers were too much for them to go participate in something like this. But then simultaneously, they're the same people who will yell about the Boogaloo or the next Tremors movie. And they're actively sort of pushing for essentially another American Civil War, but they don't want to be involved politically. And so I feel like, and Maj Touré had a speech about this, where the idea is that if you're at the point that you're willing to throw lead, but you haven't written a senator, or you haven't gone to try to meet with someone in person, or shown up for a rally or two, what are you doing? Like, why are you skipping all these sort of nonviolent processes in order to skip straight ahead to some sort of thing that's going to hurt everybody involved at some level? And so backing that, I thought it was worth going and seeing my friends and hearing what people had to say.
Awesome. Glenn, did you hear about this?
No, I didn't. I used to do political stuff. I was in the capital of Washington State and did political stuff. A couple quick observations about rallies like this. First of all, I've seen this firsthand. I've been like in meetings where elected officials are getting talked to about NRA voting records and stuff. The size of crowds is something that politicians, even the dirtbag ones, really pay attention to, because all they care about is getting reelected. And I know everybody knows that, but I've like seen it with my own eyes, and I'm validating what everybody thinks. The other one is the estimates of crowds. The liberal media always says, that, oh yeah, there were like a few people. They constantly undercount conservative crowds, and they constantly inflate liberal crowd numbers. And that's it. And the other thing I've noticed, and I've seen a million of these rallies at the state capitol when I was there, when there's a conservative rally of any kind, there's no trash, there's no garbage. In fact, I think that conservatives like actually pick up more trash than they accidentally leave behind. I've talked to the state police about this, that do the crowd control stuff, and they're like, we love having you guys because you guys pick up after yourselves. And obviously the liberals don't. And a third thing or fourth thing about these rallies, I go for reasons other than making a statement. I mean, there's that too. I get energized. I come out of that like on an energy high, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. I'm not alone, because in a state like Washington State, like where I'm at, you feel like you're some closeted weirdo, right? And nobody believes what you do. So those are some thoughts about rallies in general.
That's a fair prediction. If I can sort of soapbox for a moment, on the way up, I had a friend of mine that called and was just like, yeah, you're really going to that thing? You're going to be unarmed. I don't know. What if there's agitators? And, he's worrying. And a lot of people worry. Or if they don't worry, they just roll their eyes, whatever it is. But I told him on the phone, I was like, I understand that this is at the Capitol. I understand it's in front of, the White House. And there's a lot of imagery there. But I don't think anybody that is involved actually believes that they're speaking truth to power in the numbers that they expect. Like, there's not been enough social media on it. There's not been enough attention. It's not going to be big enough to be sort of the dream, which is 1 million man march for gun rights or something. I suspect that what I'm going to be subjected to, and it turned out to be true, is a rallying call from new media. Essentially, to my mind, they're trying to fill the void that was left by what is now the crumbling of the NRA. So no one under 40 wants to be involved in the NRA, and everyone under 40 turns to YouTube and new media as their authority for these sort of developments and understanding what's happening in gun law and protesting and things like that. And so, to my mind, this was an attempt to organize and project backwards at the Second Amendment community and tell them that there is a voice out there, that they can be unified, and that this is not the time to start sort of eating ourselves from within, fighting over the scraps for the NRA. And in that regard, that's exactly what I saw on that stage. I saw a lot of people conveying a message of, unity and hope and cooperation, and sort of just giving a positive vibe to what is the next step for the Second Amendment fight.
Tony Simon, bring us home.
Yeah, I was energized by this. It was 5,000 people registered and said they were coming, and about between 1,000 and 1,500 showed up, according to some of the estimates I heard. Um, it was a unity thing. It was a lot of networking. I really think the energy from this and the contacts people made will reverberate through the community, because I know Carrie Sloan, she had a breakfast and a lot of 2A heavy hitters showed up to the breakfast, and her followers that wanted to be advocates came from as far away as California and Colorado just to have breakfast with her and learn how to be activists. So I'm just saying there was a lot of networking going on, and we're going to see a lot come from this. As far as the people that are poo-pooing this, yeah, they're always the vote from the rooftop boogaloo people who can't make a 4-hour trip. By the time I got there, I'd been awake 20 hours. I drove straight from work to back home, packed a bag, and then drove to DC and arrived at 1 o'clock in the morning. It is what it is, man. Either you're down with this smack. I mean, either you're down with activism or you're just someone online making a bunch of noise. And I'm not saying you had to be at this particular thing, but you have to do something. You can't say you're willing to start a civil war, but you can't be dependent upon to even make something in your local area and show up for it. I know I drove, and then they had, of course, the same thing. What do you call that thing? The World Series Championship Parade.
Oh yeah, the Nationals are everywhere. There's a sea of red and drunk.
Yeah, which was hilarious because I'm walking through a sea of red in the royal blue shirt that says "Gun control equals racism." But I'm looking at it and I'm going, I wonder how many of these people are gun owners that somehow couldn't make the 2A rally, but they'll stand in line, listen to a bunch of baseball players just say the same inane.
It'll infuriate you. I've seen at least 2 comments of people who said that they were there for the Nationals rally, but didn't bother coming over to the Second Amendment rally.
Yeah,
I've seen at least 2 people claim that.
And we walked. I'm sure there was when we went to the restaurant afterwards to have dinner with a bunch of the people that organized the rally and a bunch of speakers. We walked through the thing, and I'm listening to the baseball players say dumb things like, you people motivate me to play baseball because I was ready to quit. I'm like, yeah, $30 million a year didn't motivate you, huh? It was the Washington fans that motivated you. Yeah, all right. Just dumb jock speak. And I'm like, you waited in line to hear this? Okay, whatever.
Dang. All right. Well, appreciate you guys going. 2 things here. One, as far as estimating crowd size, we all know that guys can't estimate size very well, so it's understandable. And 2, you said, Tony, that maybe 1,000, 1,500 people showed up, or Othias said that, but you said 5,000 people responded saying they were going to be there. That's a pretty good percentage because I think over 1 million people said they were going to raid Area 51 and only 1,500 showed up. So I think we're batting 1,000 on this one. Next story is going to go a little bit presidential campaign. We're going to start covering some of this as we go here. I think it's just about time. But Beto withdraws from presidential race, and Kamala Harris lays off staff and shuts down New Hampshire office. I am not a political guy, a political junkie. I don't know if this is just very strategic on Harris's part to shut that down because she doesn't think she can win it, and she thinks that maybe I was the place to put her money. I don't know, but Beto switched because he was not getting a whole lot of traction to a very, very anti-gun, confiscate your guns kind of campaign, and it fizzled out, I think, even a little bit faster than anyone expected to. I'm not surprised at all. Glenn Tate, I would like to hear your opinion on both of these stories.
Yeah, I am a cold-hearted, practical guy on this. I was saddened to see Francis Beto. What is that all about? What can I give myself a nickname?
Yes.
Anyways, Glenn Tate's a fake name, so I kind of have. But anyway, Beto was the best thing ever for our side when he would say out loud what we all know that those people are thinking, but none of them were ever stupid enough to say. When he would say that stuff out loud. That's water cooler talk. That's what I talk about. When normal people that aren't nut jobs like us, like normal people, let's say in office, are going, did you hear this guy talking about confiscating guns? That sounds really stupid. I think that Beto did so much to galvanize our side and to turn out votes. I was sad to see him go because he was so effective for our side. Kamala Harris is a weird thing. I thought she would do really, really well for a variety of reasons. I thought that there was a lot of big DNC money and super delegates behind her early on. But it was weird. The first couple debates, she was so terrible that it was kind of hard to recover. And when you're in a sea of what used to be 22 candidates, one slip up and everybody's moving on to the next one. So I think she's done for. But I thought on a lot of levels she would be perfect. But she's a terrible candidate. So there you go. And I'm gonna miss you, Beto. I'm gonna miss you a lot.
No doubt. Tony Simon, thoughts?
All right. Yeah, I just pulled into the driveway. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm sad that Beto left because he was actually a galvanizing force. Because he brought gun owners together and they were like, oh, heck no, you're not taking our AKs and AR-15s. So sad to see him go. Kamala Harris, she's not going to make it, dude. It's just that simple. And I think it's funny that she's saying, oh, America's not ready for a black female president. I'm like, you understand it's a Democratic primaries, right? It's Democrats that aren't ready for a black female president.
True that. Othais, thoughts?
I feel like on his way out, he's at the bottom of the pack. He wanted to get that news attention. He threw out the most egregious thing he could think. And it's a bit of Hail Mary and it failed. But I am concerned just ever so slightly, and we've been hearing this term a lot lately, but I am concerned when you move sort of what people call the Overton window towards an argument about whether or not it's ban everything or not, because the real fight isn't about whether or not something's getting banned overall. The real fight is in a lot of state arguments, a lot of seeing the Second Amendment as a right and not worrying about whether or not this type of gun or that type of gun is safe. I think it's more about getting back to the core mission of this is enshrined, back off of it entirely.
Agree. Good stuff, guys. I'm going to go back just to one because I missed this one, and it was definitely one I wanted to talk about. Former Brady campaign president shows support for Second Amendment. This is from Cam Edwards over at Bearing Arms. Cam spoke, and a lot of other people spoke at the Second Amendment rally in Washington, D.C. on November 2nd. But one of the surprising ones, and I read this article in full because I thought it was interesting, there was another figure that took the stage, and his name was Dan Gross. He's the former president of the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence and a man who once called for a ban on handguns. He took the stage to show his support for the right to keep and bear arms, as well as rejecting a so-called assault weapons ban and other gun control laws, and said that he may still support things like expanded background checks personally. He's not interested in pushing gun policy at all. Instead, he's hoping to find common ground with gun owners on non-legislative, non-coercive best practices and tools that can help ensure responsible gun ownership. Othais, did you see him?
I absolutely did. And I have a weird take on him because the entire time he was speaking, he was so roundabout, and I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm very glad he was there. I understand it was a hard thing for him to stand in front of that crowd. But because he took such an indirect tack, and because he's probably not used to speaking to gun owners, and therefore that's why he did the indirect congratulatory tact, a lot of people hesitated, including myself, the immediate people around me. There's a lot of eyes left and right, and not because of who he was, but just because I think this is something he's more comfortable with on the other side of the political fence, which is there's this estimate of being like, okay, we're all here. Everybody give yourself a pat on the back. You did a good job. There's a lot of that sort of reinforcement that comes from what I would deem to be a more left-wing vision of the world. And people can argue with me. That's fine. But it's been my perception. Whereas whenever I deal with people who tend to be more right-leaning, although I'm sort of more libertarian-leaning in my personal beliefs, there's an element of merit rather than personal rewards. So he had a way of speaking in which it was very soft, very indirect, and it worried me when I heard it. By the time he is done speaking, I ultimately got the message that you just put out there, that he would like to share some common ground, and he doesn't necessarily believe in everything, but he does believe in gun safety. He does like the idea that gun culture is what's going to keep people safe rather than legal activity, because to him, enforcing gun safes or trigger locks or all that other stuff really isn't going to save many lives. But something like the Eddie the Eagle program would save a lot of lives in his eyes. At least that's my assumption, because again, he was not super direct. which left me more curious than I was motivated by his speech. But at least I was curious, and I would like to hear more of what he actually intends to have happen. Disregarding that, though, I'm always welcome to hear from the other side of the fence. Like, it's always nice to see people trying to find at least where they can agree, and then only spending the time arguing about where they actually disagree.
Yeah. Tony Simon, your thoughts?
Listen, it was great that he was there, but when you come after someone like Maj Toure and KD, Kevin Dixie, and you come in with this wishy-washy, namby-pamby, let's kind of meet in the middle, I'm like, dude, what are you saying? Like you're not being direct. I'm out here. There are 30 speakers. There are a lot going on, and you're just not captivating me with the words that are coming out of your mouth, man. You know what I mean? I'm standing here with other people. I'm standing over here with Diane Mueller. I'm having conversations, and you're droning and not making a real point. You're not standing up for something. You know what I'm saying? And you're in a crowd where you can scream Molan Labe and get the whole crowd to start roaring and chanting. Yeah, I mean, great. And you know, with the diversity shoot and everything I do, I want these ideas expressed, but at the Second Amendment rally, as he were, it was not exciting to me.
All right.
Sorry.
That's a fair take. Glenn Tate.
Boy, Tony captured a lot of what I was going to say. I wasn't there and Tony was, but I'll say this. When you were reading off his quotes, my first thing was, this sounds like a typical politician, and I don't like that stuff. And the other thing is, I don't know how else to say it than this whole work together, common ground stuff. We've been doing that for like 40 years, and I'm done with it. And it probably made sense. If this was like what marginal tax rates should be for capital gains, maybe this whole meet in the middle kind of, if it were normal public policy, okay. But this is, I'm frustrated and done. And that's probably a bad attitude on my part, because when people come to you and they want to work with you, maybe I and several million other gun advocates are saying, no, we're done talking to anybody. Maybe we're being too quick, but it just sounds like politician talk, and I'm done with that. That was so 1990s.
To be fair, I think he would have done a ton better if he had come out and openly said, I disagree with you about this, and I disagree with you about that. However, I hope you can agree with me about the value of X, Y, and Z. Like, if he had just hammered his points, he would have come off a lot better. Because the problem is, we're all sitting there still kind of wondering what exactly were his points. Like, he alluded to things that we disagree about. He didn't say what they were. And I think that leaves people very doubtful. However, after talking about this, I'm probably going to go reach out to him, because I'm extremely curious about what he does want to do. Because I know that the thing he was pushing was the idea of an organization that was based on right and responsibility. And if there were a day in which something bad happened involving a gun on TV, and the first thing I saw wasn't Craig Reschnell, whatever, wants to ban yada yada yada, but instead I saw, more people need to sign up for the safety course. More people need to do this thing. There's going to be a free events with whatever training in that county, because now we're worried about that in that county, whatever it is. If the movement went from political action to personal accountability actions, and there was an organization that you could point to for that, I'd back it.
Yeah. All right, excellent commentary, guys. Next one is going to be a little bit different, but we've kind of been seeing it all over the place. Florida man is alive thanks to his pregnant wife and their AR-15. I've been seeing a lot everywhere about mainstream media maybe reporting on this, where we normally don't see effective application of self-defense things in the news. But what happened is a guy was sitting in his house, two masked men busted into the back door, put a pistol on him, and they're grabbing his 11-year-old daughter. He's telling them, I got nothing for you. And they say, give me everything you got. It became violent really fast. One of them started pistol whipping him, and he actually got a fractured eye socket, a fractured sinus cavity, a concussion, 20 stitches, and 3 staples in his head. His wife, who's 8 months pregnant, went in the back bedroom and peeked out to see, or was in the back bedroom, peeked out to see what was going on. One of the guys shoots at her. She retreats, grabs an AR-15, returns fire, clipped one of them, and I guess they later found a man dead in the ditch. The other gunman ran off after the fatal shot was fired. Clearly preaching to the choir, the people listening to this show, this is the kind of thing that we know goes on all the time. It's interesting to see this one covered by mainstream media. And Tony, I'm going to start with you.
Well, one of the shows I do is self-defense gun stories, and this happens enough to have us have four four stories every week for the last 70 something weeks. We all know this happens when you often hear, "Well, the good guy with a gun is made up. It's a fallacy. It's a myth." I'm like, no, no, it's not. And also, I mean, I'm thinking she just let him get his butt slapped a little bit. You know what I'm saying? He probably made a few too many pregnant jokes. She was like, "Oh yeah, hit him again, hit him again." "Oh no, you didn't shoot at me. You're gonna learn today." So I mean, that might have been her, but yeah, I'm glad this woman was able to save her husband, and I mean, truthfully, we keep saying AR-15, AR-15, but it's a semi-automatic rifle. I mean, if it would have been a Mini 14, if it would have been an AK, SKS, same thing, but it's an AR-15, and I'm kind of glad it made national news just based on that as a positive story.
Glenn Tate, good thing, bad thing, indifferent?
Oh yeah, great thing for all the reasons everybody else has mentioned. Here's a take on it that I immediately saw. Back to that water cooler stuff, right? What a great way to tell a woman in your life, or maybe I don't know, your daughter or somebody, some woman out there who's kind of on the fence and doesn't want to shoot an AR-15 because they're weapons of war and they watch movies and they see all this recoil and stuff. This would be a great thing to say. There was a woman in Florida, 8 months pregnant, who shouldered an AR-15 and shot somebody who was beating her husband in their house and saved the day. So, ladies, an AR-15 is not too unwieldy to use. And so turn it into like an anecdotal water cooler thing. And, maybe you'll persuade some women out there. Because here's the thing, anybody, men, women, whatever, who go to the range and shoot an AR-15 end up loving them anyway. So all you got to do is get them to take that first step and not be scared of it. And what a great example, 8 months pregnant. I mean, that doesn't scream out like, typical gun owner.
Totally, completely agree. Excellent point. Othniel?
The only thing I'd add is this is it's also a good opportunity to sell some suppressors, because 8 months pregnant, I feel like you might as well have a can on that. Probably help out a little bit,
Nice. Actually, I'm just leaving the range now where the guy next to me was introducing the girl to firearms, and she shot an AR-15 for the very first time tonight. So, I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's out there, man. It's mainstream, and I'm happy about that.
Very, very good stuff. About 5 days ago, constitutional carry goes into effect in Oklahoma, and the constitutional carry gun law took effect last Friday, also known as permitless carry. The law lets Oklahomans carry a firearm in public without a license. Most Oklahomans 21 and older can now carry concealed or unconcealed firearms without having gone through a background check or training requirements, with exceptions for those illegally in the country or being convicted of certain crimes. I feel like I've been reporting on this, or I'm not a reporter. I feel like I've been speaking about this a lot this year. I've seen constitutional carry go into several places. I'm drawing a blank on what they are right now. But Othniel, do you think that this is something that we're going to see more of, less of, or is it just
Not around here, apparently. We had the same referendum, and it failed in South Carolina. And I'm going to tell you, I talked to all the gun owners about it because I was excited. And no, it didn't lose on the basis of being anti-gun or dangerous or anything like that, but because I'm still in a state that really kind of wishes it hadn't got rid of the Sunday blue laws. And so we did not get a constitutional carry or an open carry because that's just not polite.
wow? Okay.
Like it was all put on one ticket, and it was just so impolite that they're just like, well, we can't be impolite. And that's how it all burned down.
All right. That's fair. Glenn Tate?
Wow. I've lost track of how many states are doing this. You ask if there's going to be more of them. My sense is that most states that have awesome populations that want to have, constitutional carry, like Oklahoma and all the other states, have probably already done it. You know what I mean? So I don't know that we're going to see more. And it'll be fun to look at crime statistics in Oklahoma. And I'm betting that crime will not increase. It'll probably softly, gently, a little bit decrease because all this constitutional carry. And, 6 months from now, Tony's going to have a bunch of stories out of Oklahoma of people that were constitutional carrying, doing good stuff and defending themselves. So it's all good. And we're probably not going to see a ton more of it, but okay, that's great. All the states that have it, my state does not, unfortunately.
Yeah. Tony? Are you there?
He was probably muted and forgot.
He was. Tony, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. My internet was acting up. Yeah, it's great. Not going to happen in Jersey, but I'm glad it's happening in other places.
That was terrible. I shouldn't have laughed at that. I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, hey, listen, I know all those other states have blood running in the streets because they have constitutional carry, and I just feel so much safer here in New Jersey not being able to leave my house with my firearm or hollow point ammunition.
Yeah.
You guys are suckers. Thank God they banned the slingshot here under the assault weapons ban in '91.
Oh, it was tough. It was close call. There was almost blood running in the streets from slingshots.
It was literally used to kill a giant.
Literally.
Yeah.
New Zealand has less than 20% compliance with only 7 weeks left in the buyback program. This is really just kind of a duh moment. Looks like they're going to see about maybe 30% of the suspected guns that they have in the country. They estimate that the guns in the country are about 175,000. They've had about, 32,000 prohibited weapons turned in so far at this point. In a previous program enacted in Australia in 96 and 97, they had a 40 to 80%. When I think about New Zealand, I think about beautiful landscapes and The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and things like that. I don't think about a lot of people who are hungry for freedom and will not comply with gun laws that are, in my mouth, ridiculous. But I think that this is a great thing. It's we have seen Hong Kong, we have seen Venezuela, we are seeing some civil disobedience now in New Zealand. I'm not necessarily surprised by it, but 30% they call a moderate but tangible success, or I'm sorry, a modest but tangible success. I say BS. I say that people are just not having it. People don't want it, and people don't want to let one man become the most powerful person in the country by being an insane maniac. Glenn, I'm going to start with you here.
Yeah, this is standard. I mean, I remember, I think I even heard it on your show, and Tony, since he's from New Jersey, probably knows about this, that I think it was New Jersey had like 0 people turn in magazines or something like that. And I also heard on your show about a year ago that Boulder, Colorado, they didn't even have registration. It was like, come in, don't even tell us who you are, and we'll give you a certificate saying that you told us that you have a gun, but we don't know who you are. It was like the weakest form of gun registration. And they had like 120 people in a county with 100,000 people do that. And now you've got New Zealand. I mean, if you can't herd people from New Zealand and get them to comply, then you can't do it anywhere in the world. I actually knew a guy from New Zealand, and they're very conformist thinking, by the way. And so it doesn't work anywhere. It doesn't work in even New Zealand. So more water cooler, anecdotal stuff to tell your friends.
100%. Oh, Thias.
Yeah, I just have to agree. I'm surprised they got 30% or 20% or whatever it is currently. Like, even that's remarkable to me.
Yeah, I think they're 20% now. They expect 32%, but I mean, there's only 7 weeks, and I don't remember the number, but it's actually been going for quite a while, if I recall.
They'll just catch it later is the problem. Like they'll come around and get them when they get them. Like it's more of a waiting game because they know the problem with these sort of things is it's not even about getting what's there. It's about preventing the addition. You will get it all eventually over time, as long as nobody's introducing new firearms and they're not allowed to keep whatever you do find when you find it. So I don't know that they're going to be super worried. Even if there was 0 turn-ins, they'll find it. It'll take time, but they'll find it, and eventually they'll get what they want.
Tony Simon, did you expect hobbits to have this much moral?
Listen, being here in Jersey and having no one turn in magazines, no one surprised me, but there's always going to be that 10, 20% that comply with every law. So I'm thinking that's just not unusual. But how stupid do some of those 20% feel now that they were all early giving away their guns when they just could have waited and nothing would have happened?
Yeah.
Good job.
That's the game. Unless you get caught.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, unless it's this passive movement or whatever you call it by not turning in your guns, unless that accompanied by some political movement, eventually, like Othaya said, they will get your guns. Unless you have a political pushback and get rid of some of these politicians and change that law, it's just a matter of time before they do get your gun, you to pass away and your kids to turn it in. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Or wait for someone to get caught and make a huge story about convicting him and then do another amnesty push. They'll get them unless you add political activism to it and change the government.
There you go. I'm going to blend two stories into one. Virginia flips Democrat control of both House and the Senate. And just to kind of bring it all around, David Hogg thinks that Virginia should just buy the NRHQ and make it a gun violence museum. I think he is an idiot personally. Othaius, what do you think about Virginia flipping blue?
It's not unexpected from my perspective. I know it disappoints a lot of people, but being right inside DC, they've been importing a lot of people with not necessarily traditional Southern opinions. And I'm not trying to say that as like some sort of North-South fight, but just the culture changes. I'm in an area that I would say probably 70% of the people who live here have not lived here for more than 5 years, because we're seeing a growth phase in my city. And you can tell the attitudes are changing, the friendliness is wearing out, and you're getting an importation of a more general U.S. culture rather than the localized one. And so you'll see the same thing in state levels eventually. And I think commuter culture just has finally gotten Virginia under control. There's an emphasis on people who see themselves as city dwellers to de-emphasize things that are more independent. And whether that means you vote blue instead of red, or blue instead of yellow for libertarian or something like that, it doesn't make much difference. In this case, it's going to drive people towards the Democrats. I think it was kind of inevitable with that population increase.
Our political correspondent, Glenn Tate.
Yeah, it's funny. A good friend of mine, Dutch Hillenberg, ran for the state senate in Virginia, and I was texting him last night, and he lost, of course. And he describes it. The Northern Virginia suburbs have become very, very blue. Government is a growth industry, and it's growing in DC. It's taken over everything that Othaius said. And it's too bad, but we see this going on everywhere. And Virginia will then, start circling the drain and going down the toilet like all the other states that are solidly blue. And then they'll wonder what happened. So not unexpected. And by the way, the cool thing about my friend Dutch, I'm like, hey, thanks for running. And he goes, yeah, I got that. Oh, he used some bad words I'm not going to use in your show. His opponent to spend $500,000, and Dutch spent like $7.22 or something. So at least he extracted $500,000 out of the Democrats' war chest. So that was worth it. So yeah, I mean, that's all I got.
I love it.
Well, being born and raised in Virginia, I don't even know if people know that Virginia is pretty much 3 states. It is Northern Virginia. It is Tidewater area, which is along, Norfolk and Ports, all that area over there where the military bases are by the water. And then it's Western Virginia. I mean, it's almost 3 distinct cultures. And because of the growth of government, just like Glenn said, just like Othaius said, they brought all those people in to work in the DC area, and they all move into Northern Virginia, and they just changed the dynamic. And much like Jersey, which we have large cities here that just drags the rest of the state down, that's exactly what happened with Northern Virginia. And that's what happens when you don't vote and a bunch of people move in from outside that don't have the same interests of the culture you do.
Yeah, 100%. Next up, I'm going to do a choose your own adventure. I'm going to give you guys 3 stories. You can pick 1, 2, or all 3 to talk about when I go to you. First up is Taryn Tactical, trainer of John Wick himself and many other countless Hollywood celebrities, is the victim of the California wildfire. Not a complete loss. No one died, none of that, but there is some definite property and range damage. Colorado man whose house was destroyed during a SWAT raid will not be compensated. A guy shoplifts, goes and barricades himself in this house that the homeowner has no idea who this is. He's renting the house to his son. The son has no idea who this is, just randomly ran into a door, barricaded. They did, I don't know, $500,000 worth of damage to a house, and insurance only paid him $380,000. He sued, and the court system said no, they were doing their duty, and you will not be compensated for any of this. Last part of this is gun violence activist uses a gun to kill her 3 kids and herself after not getting her wishes in a divorce court. She had been all over Facebook talking about gun safety and the gun violence epidemic. Divorce doesn't go her way, so she kills her 3 children and herself. Glenn Tate, start with you.
Well, I'm drawn to the Colorado thing because I'm like a law geek, and I'm familiar with this and familiar with the legal principle, and I get it. You can't, and this sounds weird, and Othias as a libertarian is going to like jump out of his chair and everything, but if the police had to pay for all the stuff they broke and messed up, it would cost a lot of money. They should pay for it. Don't get me wrong, but that's kind of the reasoning. But here's the thing. This is more of a political than a legal thing. If I were whatever Colorado jurisdiction this was, I would have said, you know what? That's really terrible. We owe you some money. I would have voluntarily paid. I know that's like not what people expect. It should be some big legal debate. I think it's terrible that you can break other people's stuff and not have to pay for it. I don't know anyone else that gets to do that. One of the things that bugs me, I sue government for a living, right? So, and not this particular topic, but other ones. It always bugs me when judges and sometimes juries sit there and they say things like, well, we'll just have to pay for it through our tax money. Yeah, actually you will. It's I was doing an argument in a court and it hit me. I had all these prepared notes and I just set them aside and I go, hey, I went to the gym today, and these judges are like, oh my God, this guy's on drugs or something. What's going on? I said, went to the gym and, I was working out and the calorie counter on the thing. And they're like, oh God, where's this going? I said, so I did elliptical for like 20 minutes and it was like 200 calories. I said it more eloquently than I just did. And I said, I love Sprite. And they're like, oh my goodness, this guy is just a lunatic. And I said, so I look at a can of Sprite. I think it was 200 calories, whatever. And I said, this is the point of the takings clause of the Constitution. If government wants stuff, they need to pay for it so that they internalize the cost. So they don't just go and do stuff with no consequences. If they do stuff that hurts people, they have to pay for it, not just because it's fair, but because it inhibits them. It slows them down from doing stuff that hurts people. And I would use the elliptical trainer Sprite, analogy with this Colorado thing. You guys thought I was crazy too. You're like, we booked a guest who's insane. Oh my God, shut off his mic. But no, but I mean, it's a tragedy. But I get the legal reasoning. I just don't agree with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, I mean, honestly, if every time they put a bullet hole in something other than a perpetrator, the local governments would go broke in 2 months. I understand this. It's infuriating and it's just terrible, awful luck. And I don't know, like I'm like maybe carry insurance that pays for the whole thing. I don't know. It's tough.
To be fair, I'm not a true libertarian, but the libertarian perspective could still be argued that you should be insured. And then in a way, crimes like these are half the responsibility of the person who did it, but then the amount of force used to get them out is somewhere between state responsibility and act of God. Like it's really hard to differentiate. If the police used excessive force, maybe they should be on the hook for some of that excessive force, but that's really hard to prove, and that's going to create a big problem. So I'm not surprised at the outcome of that, and ultimately the costs should be borne by the person who committed the crime, broke into the house, and used it for shelter, but good luck collecting that. So that is one of those weird failings where insurance needs to be your go-to.
Yeah, and they actually did have to bring down and demolish the house. They deployed tear gas and explosives in a 19-hour standoff between them and the shoplifting suspect. I'm like, what the hell were you stealing it that it's worth all this? I don't know. But, and I agree. It's kind of like blaming guns for mass killers. It's not necessarily the police that are at fault here. It's the guy who shoplifted and then decided to start a standoff in a stranger's house. Definitely. It's a tough one, right? Like you feel for the guy on the one hand, on the other hand, you're like, well, sorry.
I would be very happy to know if there was another way for the police to handle this, and if they were negligent in how they just sort of tried to do this. That's one thing, but I don't know. It's tricky. This one requires an understanding of the situation that goes beyond reading a headline.
True.
There's always another way of handling it. I mean, again, remember when Noriega took refuge in the Catholic Church in Panama? They surrounded him, blasted rap music, and talked him out, or some crap like that. So yeah, there's other ways to handle it. It's just, you're cops, you have a SWAT team, you got a lot of neat stuff. So let's blow some holes in the wall and get this guy. And the guy got paid from his insurance company. This wasn't his only house. His son and their family lived there, but he also lived on the property on a separate house. So it's not as if he was homeless. Um, it's not fair. It's not right. But like you guys said, I mean, the cops are never going to pay for all the damage they do.
To be fair, maybe they should just write him a receipt against his future property taxes.
There you go. That's something to do. It didn't cost anybody any money, really. He just gets to keep his money.
Yeah, they hedge against future income, but we're not really out anything if it doesn't exist, right? Anything else on the other two stories from anybody? All right. I am glad that Taryn Butler turned out okay and everything was good there. Moms Demand has their criminal acts ignored in New Jersey. This has actually come up before on the show. I thought it was interesting to kind of bring up again, posted on October 29th on Ammo Land. There is a guest speaker. His name is Scott Papalardo. Papalardo. I don't know.
Papaya.
Papa Giorgio, I think. I don't know. He's that guy who on YouTube basically committed a felony and made a short barrel rifle by cutting the barrel off of his AR-15 to virtue signal, I guess. Anyway, went into New Jersey. He possessed several large capacity magazines, unserialized 80% AR-15 lower receivers, and the parts and tools to complete the lower receivers to functioning AR-15 rifles, and possessed a large bayonet. All these things are illegal. I could read all the criminal codes to you, but I'm not going to because I want to start with Tony and say, Tony, I mean, this is BS in my opinion. I don't think that just demonstrating something puts you above the law, but I want to hear your thoughts.
This is horse crap. And I pointed it out when NJ2AS, Alexander Rubin's group, pointed it out, took pictures of it, followed the guy. And they were the one that, brought the story forth. Right now we have a former Marine looking at 36 months in prison because during a divorce, his ex-wife, this is here in New Jersey, his ex-wife said, he threatened her or whatever. They searched his house. They found a shotgun in an attic that he doesn't even use. And they went through his Marine Corps gear and found 2 30-round magazines from his time in the Corps, just in his gear. They arrested him based on those 2 30-round magazines. He had no ammunition and no firearm that those 30-round magazines could fit into. And as far as he knew, it was just gear in that box. He didn't think that those were 30-round magazines because they were irrelevant as a weapon or firearm. This guy intentionally showed up, this anti-gun activist intentionally showed up with stuff that was illegal in the state. He showed up with the intent of showing things that were illegal, with the intent of bringing things that he knew were illegal into the state, and the police did nothing about it. This is on purpose. This is anti-gun crap. This is police being political and not enforcing the law that somehow they said was so important to do, but they're not doing it in this person's case.
The AG's office, the governor's administration, and the township police have not responded for comment. Othaius.
So we're supposed to be, in the greater sense of it, a rule of law society. So the idea is, while there is some discretion in the courts, ultimately precedent and fact are supposed to rule out. So my problem with this is, if you let off this guy, you need to let off that guy, let off guy. It needs to be continuous across the board. We need to have expectations that fit both motive and blah, 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 blah. You guys are absolutely correct. You hit the nail on the head. If you intentionally break the law, your punishment should at least be the same punishment as someone who unintentionally broke the law. Minimum. And that's really all it is from my perspective. Like, it doesn't, I know it's a gun issue and it shows some hypocrisy, but realistically, I just think it's a weird legal issue where you're getting favoritism based on someone's political bias. And I don't care for that in media, and I especially don't care for it in the courts.
Third-degree crimes are 3 to 5 years in state prison and a $15,000 fine per offense, and fourth-degree crimes are up to 18 months in state prison and up to a $10,000 fine per offense. That's a lot of jail time and financial and fiscal penalty as well. Glenn Tate?
I think the leftists in New Jersey should have thought about this better, about this obvious double standard. It's obviously a double standard. And the problem that they're going to have is that it's a signal to everybody out there that they don't have to follow the law, and that there's a double standard, and then people quit following the law because why would you? It's so arbitrary. I mean, the two examples you just gave are so clearly, it's selective enforcement. And so I think that the liberal politicians may think they're being very clever, and they may seem cool, and they're kind of laughing at themselves that their friends don't get busted, but this poor hapless Marine does. But it'll come back to haunt the libs, because more and more people will just throw up their hands and say this is a sick joke, this thing called the law. And that's not going to be good for the people in power in New Jersey. And they have it coming.
Yeah. The final story I wanted to go over tonight is a little bit of an op-ed from the WashingtonPost.com. And Shannon Watts gloats that the NRA is weaker than ever. I'm not 100% sure that I even disagree with her as much, but this article is trash. The questions that they ask her are, you started this after Newtown, Connecticut. There have been so many slaughters since then, editorializing. I'm wondering where you see progress being made and what sort of keeps you optimistic. She just talks and talks and talks, and we have to fix it all, whether it's gun homicides or gun suicides or unintentional shootings. All that matters. They next ask, what's frustrated you most in your efforts to change some of these gun laws? And she says, basically, politicians regurgitating the NRA talking points instead of talking in a bipartisan way with one another about laws that work. Then she basically just makes up numbers and says, you can look at Connecticut, which passed background checks on every gun sale and saw gun homicides drop by, I believe, 40%, and gun suicides drop by 14%. And then you can look at a state like Missouri that undid all their background check requirements, and gun homicides, I believe, went up by 27% and gun suicides went up by 16%. I actually tried to corroborate these numbers or to even disprove these numbers, but I could not find anything that was even remotely about this. I couldn't figure out when Missouri actually undid their background check requirements. I didn't see any stories on that. It's all just made up. And then she says one of the concerns of gun owners about gun control is that ultimately it's an effort to repossess or confiscate their guns. What's your message to them? Or I'm sorry, that was the interviewer. And she says 80% of gun owners support stronger gun laws. And then he says, interviewer says, is the NRA as powerful as ever? She says it's weaker than ever, and talks about some of the reputational and financial hits that they have been taking over the years. I don't disagree with that one, actually. And blah, 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 blah. Othias?
Well, sadly, selfishly, I certainly hope the NRA is weaker than ever, because it's been a bad advocate, and it's long needed people to either enforce that it be a good advocate or walk away, and it looks like we're choosing to walk away. But to her point, the first thing that stands out in my head is that she quotes that often quoted, most gun owners want more gun control, which is an extension of them asking very loosely weighted questions about, would you like universal background checks? That's usually the one that they get people, because what they'll do is they won't say, do you want universal background check? They'll say, do you think that felons and crazy people should have guns? And when they say no, then they put the check mark that you want universal background check. The question is, even if you say, do you want universal background check, what form should it take? Blah, 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 you get the point. That number has not been surveyed again that I know of recently, and I have a feeling it's going down, and they don't realize that they're losing that mutual support that they used to have because of the games they play. If they would fairly present an opportunity to have these sorts of controls in a way that was accessible to everyone and not necessarily entirely government backed or expensive or whatever prohibitive thing they want, they might see that agreement. But they're eroding that. They keep making things more difficult and more tangential to what's actually going on. And I suspect that ultimately we're going to see more and more polarization. The interesting thing is they're celebrating the death of the NRA. And the sad thing is they don't realize that the NRA actually was a grassroots organization. So the people don't go anywhere. They just become more severe. When whatever replaces the NRA is going to be much worse for the anti-gun crowd than the NRA was. The NRA would compromise. As a matter of fact, that made gun owners mad. So they're all worried about this boogeyman that they're now supposedly killing. That boogeyman was much easier to deal with than what's standing behind it.
Good point. Glenn Tate.
Totally agree with Othias about the successor to the NRA being much more strident. And just like I was saying, these politicians are going to regret ever, doing these double standards. They're going to regret, quote, killing the NRA. And all right, cool. We'll move on to the next phase. You know what I mean? The next phase of gun rights activism. So, all right, that's cool.
Yeah. Tony Simon?
Oh yeah, they're making a huge mistake. One, the NRA is taking some hits. Hopefully, what's going on makes it live up to the potential that is the NRA and makes it into a more hardcore Second Amendment, pro Second Amendment group. And if that doesn't work, from what I saw this weekend, there are people willing to stand in the breach and take the place of this. I think Matthias is 100% correct. NRA was about compromise and making deals, and what's coming is not about compromise whatsoever. So, yeah, I think it's going to be like when, the Cold War happened and we thought we beat Soviet Russia, and then all of a sudden it just turned into a lot of small wars, rebellions, and different things. You couldn't put out all those fires. That's what's going to happen to the pro-gun movement.
Yeah, very true. All right. Excellent stuff, guys. That's the time we have for the stories tonight. I do want to take a minute, as I always do, and hear kind of what you guys are up to. Glenn Tate, I'm going to start with you. Anything new? Just keeping on.
Well, since you asked, okay, here's a list of stuff. Wrote a 10-book prepper novel series called 299 Days. It's been a bestseller, to my surprise, by the way. No one was ever supposed to read this. It was like Dear Diary that turned into like 90 hours of audiobooks, which is a long, weird process. I was stunned by it. I'm writing a second edition of that. Probably a fair number of people listening have probably read the books or heard of them. I have my, as I mentioned, podcast with my wife, Shelby Gallagher, who's also a prepper author, Prepping 2.0. And then coming in December or January is PAM Radio, PAM, which is Prepper Amateur Radio, flashcards on a phone, all the practical stuff you need to know about radio stuff, but none of the geek stuff, because there's a ton of geek stuff out there. And if you think ham radio stuff is full of geeky stuff and you watch YouTube, you're probably right, because there's a lot of geekery out there. And this is just going to be the practical stuff. Doing a book on gold and silver, doing another 299 day series that takes place in Tennessee, and doing a book on food preparations with my wife. So kind of busy, but it's fun. It's what I live for. I get the message out, and the message, be prepared, but nothing kooky, nothing weird, just common sense stuff. And that in a nutshell is the busy life of Glenn Tate. But like I say, love every minute of it.
That's awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here. One of my favorite people. In fact, this show has 3 of my favorite people. So always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you.
Matthias, what you been up to, and where can people find you?
Oh, we just still have CN Arsenal. We're covering the history of World War I firearms. I say the same thing every time I'm on here because we are very measured and going through it systematically. But honestly, if you can see behind me, I'm starting to rack up some shotguns.
I was
so hopefully, if I can get everything arranged for 2020, fingers crossed, I'm trying to locate and snag all this other stuff is on loan. It's expensive, but shotguns are cheap, right? So I've been trying to snag up enough to do a chronological history of the repeating center fire shotgun, which I think is a mechanism most people sort of lump together, kind of like revolvers, and they don't understand that there's a lot of difference, a lot of development, and a ton of little changes and thought processes that go into the commercial market. And it's also affected a lot of how people interact with firearms in a way that you would not expect. So I'm pretty excited for this one.
Very cool. That's awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Tony Simon.
Hey.
Where can people find you?
Find me at diversityshoot.com. You also can find me on Facebook at The Second Is For Everyone. Simon Says Train on Instagram. Of course, I'm on GoFundMe if you want to help us out with The Second Is For Everyone. 2A4E Podcast is on Patreon. You can be a patron on there. We give away a rifle kit. We got with Yankee Marshall, and he gave away a P10C. So we have a lot going on. Get in there, be a patron. We even got some stuff from Patriot Patch Company that I try to give away. Come up, help us out, help us with our mission. Next Diversity Shoot is December 5th, Gun for Hire Range in Woodland Park.
So awesome. Thank you guys for being here. Thanks to everyone out there who listens every single week. We truly appreciate your ears and, honestly, just getting involved. We always talk about these being individual rights. We saw in Washington, D.C., individual rights being exercised, and we need more of that. So get involved locally, get involved nationally, just get off your butt. If you're talking about the Boogaloo, you better be talking about writing letters to senators too, because that's step one in fighting for our rights. This show is produced by Kenny Ortega and Benjamin Allreed. Could not do it without them. And we will talk to all of you next week. This Week in Guns is a production of the Firearms Radio Network. And we'll talk to you all very, very, very soon.